morning.
Good morning.
Well, morning.
A very festive webinar Wednesday for December. We all thought at the last minute, what can we do to make it be known that it's Christmas? So I've got my wee tree and we've got a Santa bunny in the back of Keith's.
It's not a bunny, it's a kangaroo.
Oh, apologies.
It's all the way from Melbourne Zoo, so you wouldn't really have snow. But anyway.
No. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining us this morning. We're just going to have a chat today about the revised statutory guidance for self-directed sport, which is very exciting. And I'm playing a dual role. I'm kind of being a guest as well because I've been part of that process. So I'll let you guys ask some questions rather than me being the question asker for a wee change, which would be nice. But what you guys been up to? What do you want to share?
Okay, well, I'll go first. We've been organising mental health first aid training, which we took part with. So it was part of our Grow Bigger Lives group, as well as some of our folk who'd been through working together for change and partners in policy making. So we did that up in Aberdeen, which was our first, which was really interesting because we got lots of diverse opinions about, to be honest, not just about the first aid training, but what next. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of a group to say, if somebody's got significant mental health needs, so rather than just the basic kind of the idea about what you do for identifying and superficial sort of first step stuff, we're trying to think about what else we could do. So that's been quite interesting.
That does sound interesting. So and like, and that's like the equivalent of doing your first aid certificate, isn't it, for kind of people that might have injuries or get hurt? It's the same kind of idea, isn't it?
It's been around for probably, I think since about 2009. It's been around. I did it back in the early days of it, and it is interesting because it's part of that whole shift from mental health being something you don't talk about. And that awkwardness, I think, round about, well, you know, what if I get it wrong? And the move to say, well, even if you're not sure what to say, just, you know, check in with somebody and check that somebody's okay. And I think
it's been around even, Alistair, I think it's been around even longer than that, because I actually did the mental health first aid, but it was way back in somewhere between 2005 and 2007. So it's even further
back than that? Oh, yeah. Right, okay.
It's early 2000s, probably somewhere, but yeah.
You know how time goes when you get to our age.
Exactly. That's what happens, isn't it?
Yeah. So we'll be having New Roots home meetings. We've got another one coming up on the 5th of January. We'll be doing good stuff for that. Yeah. And of course,
as you said at the meeting, straight back into that one, Alistair, on the 5th of Jan.
Straight back in. No messing about. There's no there's no time to waste, is there? And working together for change, we've been doing a bit of that as well.
Yeah, we had our in-person meeting recently, our second in-person meeting, and then in January back to our sort of online session, January and Feb, and then an in-person meeting in March. So yeah.
And it was a session all about person-centred planning, wasn't it, Keith? It was quite a nice, reflective, interactive space for us all to think about. What was the title of it? It had a fun title.
Plan or be planned for.
I like that.
Yeah. So just emphasising the fact that you should take control of your own plan, really. Yeah, lots of people, lots of interesting experience of planning or of thinking about support there, definitely.
Yeah. And luckily we had our Dr. Danielle Farrell in the room for that as one of our key facilitators, and she was promoting, actually didn't ask June to get this link ready, but hopefully she'll have it up her sleeve to be able to share. Danielle's got got some funding from National Lottery Awards for All to be able to do person-centred plans with folk, but she does them digitally, which is really cool, quite an innovative approach to person-centred planning. So I think she might still have capacity for a couple of plans over the next few months. So when we find the link for that, I'm hopefully June will share it and we can get folk involved. Or it's in our news brief. It's in our most recent news brief as well.
Yeah, no, I think there's still some capacity, because I was talking to somebody else about that yesterday as well, and I hope there is, because I was promoting that as a way that people could get get a bit of input about thinking about what they want, how they want their support to be in the future, or how they want their life to be in the future. Yeah, it does make such a difference. I suppose just really emphasising that fact, both mental health first aid and working together for change, where we've managed to get together with people in a room. It's just a very different experience, isn't it, from what you can do online?
Yes, definitely. And nice to have a big tureen of warm soup as well on a chilly training day. You miss these things. It was nice. Other thing we've got coming up as well, just to share an opportunity for an event that's happening on next week, Tuesday the 13th of December in the afternoon, with our pals at IRIS, who are another organisation who look at research and in the world of social care. So we're doing an event in partnership with them around creative approaches to commissioning, called No One Direction. We were looking for a pun, and about the work that In Control Scotland have been supporting up in Highlands around about looking much more creatively at option 2 of self-directed support, and how people can have choice and control in the support that they receive through just looking at commissioning slightly differently. So that event is online. It's in the afternoon. It's an hour and a half. It's at 2 o'clock, I believe it starts, and you can sign up through Eventbrite in a link that will appear shortly. But please do come along. I think we've got 70 folks signed up for it so far already, so it's proving to be a popular discussion. That was 70 folk the other day, so it might be a wee bit more. But there's room. Squeeze a few more in. Come on over if you're interested in that.
Yeah, no one direction. That's commissioning through the medium of song, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I hope so. Anyway.
We'll see. The boy. I don't know who the In Control Scotland. You would be the In Control Scotland boy band, actually. The two of you.
Oh dear. Nobody needs that for Christmas number 1. Nobody needs that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the spirit of Christmas cheer, so thinking about just all that thing about plan and be planned for, that kind of, it's quite a nice neat link into updating the SDS guidance, isn't it? Because that thing about staying within the spirit of the legislation and the whole, that's what we're keen to talk to Hannah about today, is about how it was co-produced and how we went about that process.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention, Alistair, just so we don't miss that opportunity, if anybody's thinking about Tuesday the 13th, that there's the further discussion about the guidance, which will go into more of the detail of the content on the lunchtime session from 1 till 2 on 12 till 1. 12 till 1, sorry. Yeah, 12 till 1, right? Definitely 12 till 1. I'll be there on Tuesday the 13th. So that's also next Tuesday, isn't it?
It is. And that's our normal programme of Tuesday lunchtime sessions on the second Tuesday of every month. If you're not involved and you'd like to be, send us a wee email. But at that session, it's a bit more interactive than a webinar, rather than us just blathering in your direction. You get to ask questions and be a bit more involved. But we've got Yvonne Nova from the Self-Directed Support Improvement Team of Scottish Government coming along to that session as well, to talk in a bit more detail and to be able to answer questions as well, which is a great opportunity if you really want to find out the nuts and bolts and any particular questions that you've got about the new guidance. Please do come along. If we can't answer your questions today, then we definitely will on Tuesday. And on that note, if you're watching along, please do, if you have any questions, stick them in the comments section, and we'll hopefully be able to bring them up on the screen and answer them if you've got anything in particular. It'd be great to hear from you.
Okay, well, we'll get Hannah on to join the chat.
Yeah.
Hello. Always like
Hi.
Blathering on.
Hello.
Welcome along, Hannah. Would you mind just taking a super quick moment to introduce yourself, say who you are?
Yep. I'm Hannah Tweed. I work for the Health and Social Care Alliance Scotland as Senior Policy Officer, which I normally summarise as all things social care, which means that I've had my nose in the pie of the SDS guidance quite a lot the last few months, along with colleagues in the room. So, yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much for joining us. And actually, I sometimes forget that you're not just an SDS policy person, because I feel like We've spent a lot of time together over the last few months, Hannah, haven't we? Been in a lot of the same meetings, and God, you poor soul, you're also doing other bits of social care as well, so you're a trooper.
I've just got my third evidence session on the NCS off my plate, so.
Well, thank you for taking a wee 45 minutes out of your incredibly busy schedule to join us here today.
Yeah. And just in case anybody didn't understand the National Care Service, just in case anybody's watching, Hannah, and didn't understand it. Yeah, and you were both part of the short life working group, weren't you? That was looking at the statutory guidance. So how did you get involved in that? And what did you think about getting involved in that?
I mean, I certainly felt that my life was shorter after. No, I jest. No, I was looking back over my notes back to beforehand this and realised it was only September it kicked off. It feels like it was a lot longer because there was a lot of content involved. But yeah, basically we were invited to participate, is my memory, Pauline, correct me if I'm wrong, in the blur of the distant past, based off national SDS collaboration work and sort of the broader, lots of stakeholders chatting through that forum to try and take the 2014 guidance from the proper olden days and bring it up to the 21st century in a more meaningful fashion, post-pandemic, post quite a lot of legislation, quite a lot of policy change, and see how that could be made more fit for purpose for folk on the ground.
Yeah, so it was folk like ourselves who are fairly actively involved in the world of SDS through the Social Work Scotland National Collaboration and lots of other spaces, but also some folk who we maybe hadn't, I certainly hadn't worked with in as much detail on this kind of thing before, but so a really broad bunch of folk. We had lots of civil servant type folk, but also quite a lot of local authority. We had obviously Social Work Scotland, Coalition of Carers, MECOP, the SURD funded organisation, the Support in the Right Direction funded organisations. And actually it did evolve a wee bit, didn't it, Hannah? Because the first group of people that we had in the room, there was a question of who's missing. And we I think a lot of us said, SURD, we need the SURD funded organisations to be here because they're the ones who are literally lifting up the guidance every day and using it to support people through situations that they're kind of struggling with. So they came on board very quickly. And were wonderfully valuable as well. Yeah, it was a big old bunch of folk, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there was a sort of two-stage process to that, I would say, in that there was the big old bunch of folk that we got together within the sort of September-October period to begin going, oh, this bit's not in there, and we need to reflect on this, and can we change this bit? It's been annoying me for about 6 years. Maybe phrased slightly more tactfully, but not much by the time we reached December, because we all knew each other pretty well by that point. But also a real push from ourselves and from yourselves, Pauline, and other organisations, including the SURD folk, that it needs to be more than just us in the room. We may be paid to do our jobs, so it's fair enough to expect us to read 100 pages of documentation for a meeting next week. But we also need to hear from folk accessing services directly. So we certainly had like a mailing list set up once we had a draft agreed to go, hey, can we sense check this with you? Does this land? What isn't working? And to try and sort of broaden that out even further in terms of input. It's not proper co-production, but it's closer to it than you normally see in this kind of thing, would be my sort of summary of that, if that's fair.
And Alistair, you've been sharing various things at the bottom there, haven't you? Sorry, sharing various links at the bottom.
I have indeed. We've got the updated guidance, the executive summary, the easy read version, and there's a BSL video as well. Just to let you know that we have had somebody called Girl69 trying to share her private pictures also in the chat. Please do not click on those links. Those are not authorized by any of us. That's an interesting development. I've put her blocked, but just in case any of those are appearing, please do not click on those links. They may mess up your computer or phone and not give you the links you're expecting. Anyway, back in the room.
I would also flag just before the blocked messages that the BSL video is a summary of what's changed rather than the full 100. You know, yes. So you won't be watching 6 hours of sign language.
Yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? That there is so much in the. I mean, just there's so much in the actual guidance. There's lots of pages, lots of detail, and I guess the other end of it is easy read is only like 7 pages, which I know you sometimes easy reads can go on forever, but there's not as much in the easy read to give you that sense of really, the meat of what. And I do think there's maybe something in between, that's accessible, that really gives you a sense of, without raking through everything, this is what I can expect, because it is still there's a lot of real, good human rights based detail in there, in the document. But I guess there was a lot of really useful stuff to start with, but still we struggle to get some of that into practice. So I guess I'm just wondering how confident everybody's feeling about the new and updated stuff. What's what are folks' initial thoughts about? Is it going to make a difference, do you think?
So I can maybe start off by saying I think what part of the reason for the guidance getting updated in the first instance maybe was the fact that it was 110 pages long, and it was there was a clear intent from Scottish Government to reduce that, because it felt quite repetitive, it was quite jargony, it was also really out of date. So there was a definite recognition that there was too much and it was too complicated and it was too guddled. It wasn't very clear. So I do think that although the new version isn't maybe as short and snappy as anybody might have hoped it would be, it's definitely not half the size it was. It's a bit more than that. It's still 80 something pages. It feels a lot clearer. It feels in itself more accessible to read, whether or not it's an easy read version. So I think for the lay reader like myself, I'm not a policy brain like Hannah. Hannah's much more fluent in that language than I am. I feel like it's a lot easier to understand. So for general kind of people who are practitioners or are giving advice, I think it's better. It can always be better. You can always make things clearer and more easier to read for anybody. But I think the place that this piece of paper lives in terms of policy is quite technical. Do you know, it is quite a technical document, and I think the majority of people working on local authorities won't be reading it cover to cover on a daily basis. Do you know, that it's there as a pick up and use the bits that you need to, as and when you need to, rather than as a read it from cover to cover, unless you're really short of sleeping that day.
Like a reference document, isn't it? Really, that idea that when you think you need it, let's check out what it says in the statutory guidance, so that we can see whether our expectations are reasonable, maybe, or whether we are achieving what we should be achieving in that area. Certainly that's how I used the previous. I mean, that is how I think that's how those third funded projects and how we have used the previous version, but making it more user friendly is definitely a great thing, isn't it? I think probably you saying that wasn't half. I think the aspiration was to make it simpler, more straightforward, all those things, wasn't it, as well? That it was something that made a difference, that was useful.
Yeah. And that bit about, I think things, there are some really helpful bits in the new guidance about things that are quite specific, because for me, a lot of the things, it comes down to that confidence. Like, am I doing something that's in the spirit of it, but also, I think that well, for me, the bits, things that say things like, don't put blanket bans on things like X and Y are really helpful, because it's not all about, I think the previous ones said about what you should do, but this one actually says what you shouldn't do as well, and I think misinterpretations of it about, well, this is risky. I think we're getting back to that risk question. It just, this is really specific about saying, please don't do this, because that's not what this is intended to do. Think about this instead. So there's a lot more really solid examples that people can, get into, I guess.
And if you wanted to talk through some of those, I mean, like, I guess the hope is that, yes, this is a policy document, and as you say, you don't necessarily read them for fun, Pauline, but it now includes sections saying if in areas where prepayment cards have been introduced, sometimes that works for people, sometimes it doesn't, and it restricts the services they can access. If you're going to do that, make sure you offer people choices, whether or not to use it, whether or not it's appropriate to them. And that very much would fit within that sort of blanket, avoid the blanket approach that you were outlining, Alistair. And I think having that explicitly written up is quite a useful tool for all stakeholders who could use this. Same with the stuff on employing family members as personal assistants where appropriate and with permission of the relevant individuals if that's what they want. We know some local authorities say, nope, that's not a thing that we're allowed to do because that's what we've been told. And we know others did allow that pre-pandemic, and the pandemic guidance made it clear that that was allowed where appropriate. So reinforcing that in this document, I think, is a really useful potential illustration of an example of that sort of flexibility that is trying to be threaded throughout and is sort of centered on people stuff. How consistently that happens in implementation, that's kind of beyond the power of the people putting this together, if I can be that blunt. But the intention and the buy-in from those who are participating, I think, was broadly very good. Don't know what you think, Pauline.
Yeah, and I think definitely, and I think the other thing that occurred to me then when you were speaking was, if you remember, way back in the early stages, there was a bit of a list of things that folk thought we could, an initial cull of stuff, and it was like, we could take out this, we could take out that, we could take out this, and actually quite a lot of us, myself included, push back on some of the stuff that was getting taken out, because there is a need sometimes, like, if you don't say it, assumptions are made, and assumptions come from whatever perspective you come from. And if there's like an example being the support planning section, for example, there was, we could cut down, or we could just refer on to people to other websites. I was quite clear.
You lose people as soon as you click.
Aye, and also, like, that means that if you're not saying it has to happen, then it's not as clear. So having things that are a bit more explicit, I think, has been a benefit of this version for sure. So just one.
And I think that ties into Jim's question that's up on the screen as well, because I mean, it's always a balancing act, isn't it? About, is something short enough to be useful for time pressured managers and folk using it as point reference, or is it still going to need to be something that people are reminding them, hey, this exists and this says X on page 22 or whatever. I think the answer is a bit of both. I think it is clearer than the previous one, and that can only be to the advantage of time pressured folk of all types. I mean, I'm looking on my second screen, please excuse the rudeness, but the sections are, I think, more logically named. You can jump straight to them, and although the document may be longer than you like, if I jump to, say, budgeting, which is section 7, it's about 4 pages long. It's, I mean, I'm guesstimating based on web page length here, don't quote me on that, but it's not ridiculously long. It's got very clear sort of subtitles, and I think there's a usefulness in that sort of formatting element. I know I'm getting really T's and C's there, but
that's really helpful. Being able to find things and not have to scroll through lots of stuff. I mean, the other thing, just generally, I guess, with a PDF is that you can just hit the search button as well. You can search for certain words, and it'll show you where they come up. But yeah, it's always a balancing act, isn't it? But I think, given the evidence we've had before, where we've said, base your approach on these principles, I think the evidence has shown that we need to act to say, here's an example of do this and don't do that, because otherwise it seems to be too woolly for people, despite the fact that we've given really good case examples in the past. I think
one of the additional really valuable things that's been built into this is the self-directed support framework of standards. Is because that is almost, and the standards are there for health and social care partnerships to know what good looks like, and it's obviously helpful for people using services, but it's really as a representation for, this is what we should be aiming for as people commissioning and delivering and paying for and providing support. So having them as part of the built into this new guidance is really helpful, because it does give some of that. So like, because I think sometimes, and especially when this is a brand new bit of legislation almost 10 years ago, people didn't really know what good looked like. You didn't know. People were kind of trying things for the first time and seeing what stuck. And I think we've got a lot more evidence now as to what good means.
Yeah, I think that the experience of the last few years and the experience of seeing the things that haven't worked as well have definitely, it felt like they definitely influenced what was in this statutory guidance, the things that were improved or clarified or made clear, made simpler, or whatever in this statutory guidance. I know that both you would be really keen to be involved in it, and there'd be the people who got involved, I think, would be people who'd be keen to be involved in it. But when you've got keen people who think that statutory guidance is exciting because they think it can actually do something,
I wondered where that sentence was going.
You're bound to have different views, aren't you? You're bound to have different views, even if it's only. So how did the group of people involved manage to reconcile all the different views and get it into something that we've got just now, really? Yeah.
There were a lot of differences in opinion, I'll say that for sure. Well, Hannah's thinking, I'll say the approach that was taken was draft, redraft. So it was almost like trying to find, so comments were taken on board and criticisms and challenges and all the rest of it were built into a draft, and then it was put out when it was taken into context by the civil servants to think, actually, what's the legal bit that we have to make sure we're getting right, and how does that fit within the kind of thoughts and perceptions of other folk around the room. It would be pulled together into something, and then we would debate it again. It was like, nope, still disagree, still don't think that's strong enough, or think it should be this, think it should be that. And it was really through a drafting and redrafting process that did take time, and I think there were quite a lot of disagreements that we got there in the end. I think was something everybody's fairly happy with. What do you think, Hannah?
I think there were 13 or 14 official drafts, and each of those had multiple people commenting via track changes and responding back to different comments. And I mean, some days I did feel like mostly what I brought to the group was the ability to use the combine function in Word so that you could get them all in one document. No, I'm being flippant, but and fair play to James and Yvonne at Scottish Government. That was a lot of juggling and of drawing that together. That's a huge amount of work that isn't necessarily obvious in the finished piece. But I think it's stronger for it, because I think that even at points where there was disagreement, call me naive, but I think it was disagreement from people who did want to see better outcomes in social care. And they were coming from different perspectives and different thoughts on how to get there. But the core impetus for change and why they wanted things improved, there was commonality in. And I think that does change the discourse, because it means you can have that quite open, well, I think you're wrong. Maybe not quite that blunt, but it wasn't far off it. Or where sometimes the answer would be, well, we can't change the bit on, say, eligibility criteria because it's in the legislation and it's been signed off. And until that is changed by something like the National Care Service, if it goes ahead, separate round available on the request, that bit can't shift. What we can do is frame the ways in which people should approach that in prioritising individuals, in thinking about flexible engagement with community support, so how it's presented can change, but the legislation can't. And that was fair play, to be honest, because that's a different bit of work. But yeah, there were also a lot of subgroups. I think it got to the point where there was a human rights read subgroup, there was an accessibility communications subgroup, there was a subgroup working on the legislative compliance of it. There was a lot of moving parts, and then trying to make sure that was all communicated back to people, I think was a lot of work involved in. And I think it's better for it, even if my inbox isn't necessarily.
Yeah, imagine trying to do that before Zoom as well, actually.
Oh,
seriously, I'm just thinking, because all those meetings that happened, I mean, probably couldn't really have happened in the same way, could they? Or had the same range of people at them, actually.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think it's very much a digital product.
Yeah.
So in Jim's said about what you can and can't use things for. And I guess that's one of the things we were saying, that it does actually feature things like don't put blanket bans on things like holidays. For example, it expressly says things like that, which are really helpful. One of the other things that I just was brought into sharp focus for me last week was in terms of we're involved with the New Routes Home and getting people out of hospital. And of course, one of the trickiest things I find is that hospitals have an idea of what good looks like for them, and that very, very different a picture of what good looks like for most people in the community. And when you're developing things like a service specification and you're trying to involve people in a person-centered, human rights-based plan for moving to the community, if people are basing it on how somebody is supported in hospital, it's not going to look anything like what's really needed, and B, it's not going to be achievable at all, because you're talking about multiple people, you're talking about things that are likely to potentially cause a lot of the time the frustration and the breakdowns in relationships. I actually had a situation where I was discussing whether or not I'd be an option 2 or an option 3 in order to try and break the deadlock about, who could take decisions about the shape of things. And the consultant psychiatrist said, "What are you talking about? We don't. What are you talking? What's option 2? What's option 3?" I said, "Oh, self-directed support. Well, we've nothing to do with that."
I'd love to say that surprises me.
I know, but it did make me think there, whoa, what are we doing, or what do we need to do about getting like this new guidance, not just to partnerships, but because again, it's that silo of, well, this is my little bit.
Yeah, it's also that stuff about message, isn't it? About communicate. It is about communication, and it's that thing about Scotland's approach to social care, which is just somewhere at the very start of this document, isn't it? And emphasised, I think, quite clearly in the document.
And that was actually, again, when I was reading through my notes before coming on this morning, thinking way back in time to September when we were all had less grey hair. That was one of the first things that was identified was something that needed to be clearer, was that this is the national vehicle for social care in Scotland, and it has to be abundantly clear that this isn't an optional extra. There's not an option 5, which is to do nothing. It's like this is it. Use it and use it well.
And I've got a total bee in my bonnet that I'm not wearing about what the kind of thing you're highlighting there, Alistair. Like, I'm going to go back to 2020 and say one of the results from the My Support, My Choice research that we did with Self-Directed Support Scotland was that I thought needs the most action was the one that said only 4% of people had heard about SDS via a medical professional or something in that region. It's definitely under 10, depending on which population group we're talking about. I'm not getting to the intersectional analysis, but single figures. And given how many people the GP is their first port of call, or hospital admission is the first port of call for needing rehabilitation and social care support, I find that baffling. Not surprising, because a number of times I've heard similar stories to what you just relayed, Alistair, but there's a real need for that, what I call basic education of healthcare colleagues, to empower them to signpost people. And that also feeds into what was I was ranting at my radio yesterday because hospital discharge figures, and the conclusion of the commentator was pay medical staff more to break the deadlock. And you're going, well, yeah, absolutely value healthcare professionals, no arguments on that. Maybe also consider social care as a key part of this equation rather than completely forgetting about it. That is a tangential rant from the guidance, but I think it definitely needs to be part of the rollout to ensure that wider information sharing is there.
Yeah, because when you have situations like where somebody after 2 months of lockdown loses everything, and then their behaviour starts to reflect that their lack of ability to cope, and yet 2 years on, we're now at a place where we're saying, well, not we, but people are saying things like, oh, well, until we understand what caused that behaviour, we can't be safe about, moving on safely. And it's like, I think we do know. I think we really do know. I think if any of us got stripped out everything that made sense in our lives, especially if you're autistic, then this is a likely consequence. So it's that thing about the all the way down the line. I guess, like right at the start of the pandemic, we wrote to the Scottish Government and said, like the once a day being out guidance, that that's going to be absolutely undoable for some people. It will just, and they came back within a week and just said, absolutely, if it's within somebody's care plan, make an adjustment. But that didn't happen for a lot of people. That absolutely didn't happen, and the consequence of that perfectly foreseeable. And if it's now 2 years later and we're doing the coming home report and we're putting the new guidance in, and still, the legacy of that allows people to maintain, a stay in hospital when they don't need to. It just feels so alien to everything we're talking about, the human rights-based approach. And sorry, I was on a rant there. I've got 2 more comments here. We've got another one from Jim. Really look beyond the medical model and underestimate. Yeah, and we're all really keen to sit down together. This isn't about us and them. This is about us saying, come on, let's get on the same page. We could do this together, but you have to let us.
And actually, there's some really interesting models of good practice illustrating that stepping away from that sort of what I call standard medical model. So, like, I know University of Highlands and Islands do a really awesome module with their nursing students around human rights-based approaches, both for staff themselves and their well-being, and for the people for whom they're supporting. And I think the outcomes that they're tracking from the early stages of that are fabulous. So we've got good practice. Let's see that shared more widely.
Definitely.
Yeah, and we've got Fionathan saying they're keen to link in with us as well.
Here's up by email. and I'm always a fan of folk failing better as a result of additional information, and then we'll pinch the bits that work for you.
Yeah, feeling better is what it's all about. That's absolutely fine. It's like I was thinking Toy Story. It's just you're not flying, you're just falling with style. It's like we're just we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, and anything that you see from Fiona and Jonathan makes you smile anyway, doesn't it? So,
that's true. The other thing I was going to mention as well, I suppose, which is definitely a bit less Hannah's bag, but a bit more in Control Scotland and Social Work Scotland in our kind of neck of the woods, is that this isn't the only bit of paper that supports the legislation. There's also the practitioner guidance, isn't it, which is kind of a bit more of the place for some of those in-depth understandings, examples, myths and misconceptions. Put my teeth in. All of that stuff kind of lives, and that is going to get reviewed as well. So because again, that got written 8-9 years ago, whenever it was, and practice has evolved a lot. And I think this is something I saw when I joined in Control Scotland, is that there was still a bit of a habit of people across the country using stories from 10 years ago about when SDS was brand spanking new, as examples of innovation. And actually, we've had years and years of really interesting and brilliant practice. And just like you said there, Hannah, there's stuff going on that in Highlands and Islands with nursing staff. Let's gather up some of that stuff that people might not necessarily have heard about before, and make sure that we can share experiences of more up-to-date practice and interesting examples through that process. Because we often talk, don't we, Keith, about creative support doesn't necessarily mean something absolutely unheard ofly, I never thought about hiring a hot air balloon or whatever. Do you know, it's not about that. It's just about not doing the same old, isn't it?
Yeah, creative support is just the right support for you, isn't it? Really, that's what I always think about and if the idea of being creative puts people off, we shouldn't think about being creative. We should think about just getting the right support. So what's the process for that, Pauline? The process for the renewing practitioner guidance?
So all going to kick off again. We'll get to roll our sleeves up, get back on Zoom, and start on lots of different drafts of that. So it's not going to happen till after Christmas, but there'll be and yeah, hopefully she says, hopefully, I think so.
I think it's after Christmas.
Yeah, good. Had a panic. So just be another process of working through collaboratively with the right folk in the room, and from the folk that were in the room for the statutory guidance, it'll be different folk in this room. I would imagine there'll be more people who are more involved in practice and are rather than that more strategic level potentially that were involved in the original this set of guidance. So yeah, it'll be another set of conversations and meetings, and I would say if it is something we asked again, because we did our webinar and lunchtime session during the summer about how there were plans for developing the statutory guidance, and we made it clear if this is something you're into and you're interested in, get in touch. So the same rules apply. If being part of the practitioner guidance is something you're into and interested in, give us a shout, because we will be in the room and be able to make introductions and get the right folk in the room, or just speak to you. Well, to help inform and control Scotland's input into this. Tell us your stories, tell us your experiences, and we'll try and make sure it's reflected.
Yeah, I know that Donna and the team at Social Work Scotland were really keen and are still really keen to hear from that breadth of folk and engage. And I think the same is true of Scottish Government colleagues, to make this as fit for purpose as possible. I think that's a genuine ask, for all that they have to jump through the hoops of, but we can't share certain formal written drafts until someone on high has signed off, because them's the rules. The willingness to engage and to hear from folk, I think, is really there.
So the statutory guidance, what was it, like 2 weeks ago it came out, didn't it? Is it about 2 weeks ago now? So I just wanted to check in your electronic or in your digital world or in the real world when you've been out and about, have you heard people talking about the new guidance so far? I've
heard it mentioned a couple of times from SDS leads that I've spoken to. So I think people are aware that it's there. There is a bit of there's a chat next week about some more resources and a message from the minister and things like that are going to get shared. So I think it's a bit of an evolving process in terms of how people might get to find out about it and come along to sessions like ours to find out more. But
I mean, at policy high level, I've been banging the drum of, it's the NCS, but also we have stuff that's going on in the meantime, like SDS guidance, maybe with fewer jazz hands, but not always. So have certainly been discussing it at that sort of perspective as well. I defer to Pauline for more frontline gossip.
And we do have the National Self-Directed Support Collaboration this afternoon through Social Work Scotland, which is a space for anybody working in the SDS worlds to chat about these types of things as well.
And about 15 minutes ago, I know it was on the agenda for the SDS collective, who are a group of folk with lived experience, folk accessing services, folk delivering services across Scotland. Too many SDS organisations with very similar names beginning with C, so it gets complicated. This is the collective. You're all welcome. Email Mark Han Johnson at mark@sdsscotland.org.uk if you're interested. That was not planned. If I've got that email wrong, I'm really sorry. But yeah, so I know they were discussing it today as well. So beginning that sort of conversational rollout of information as well.
I think what a lot of us in our SDS bubble were a wee bit concerned about was that the National Care Service was going to be the focus of all conversations until it is up and running, until after it's up and running as well, and that we're dead keen that that this didn't get lost. The self-directed support didn't get lost, and we weren't able to wait until the NCS is up and running before having a plan and having updated guidance and all the rest of it. So we hope that doing things like this, revising the guidance and involving as many people as possible in these processes, sparks a wee bit of kind of engagement and involvement and people thinking more about SDS as the vehicle for social care.
I think that is recognised at ministerial level. I mean, it was a question in the committee evidence session I was at on Monday, is what can happen now and doesn't need to wait? So the answer is things like the SDS guidance, eligibility criteria, care charging. I mean, I say the answer. That's the answer I gave. I'm not sure if that's the answer. But, this is part of that work and should be acknowledged and valued as such.
Yeah. I think when I've heard people talking about it, alongside the framework of standards, which is really interesting, because I think that's an interesting addition that does fit really well alongside thinking about the statutory guidance, the framework of standards, and then what they mean, essentially what they mean for how people experience self-directed support. Yeah, we're 11:45. Is that just any final comments that you would like to make about the statutory guidance before I think Pauline reminding people again about next Tuesday?
It's much more exciting than it sounds.
Much more exciting. Yeah, you're available for voiceovers, aren't you? The SSS advert and yeah.
I think apart from that, it's just I know the team, the SDS team at Scottish Government are always really keen to get feedback on stuff. So if you've had if it's a document you use or you wouldn't use because of its accessibility, its language, its tone, blah blah blah, whatever, do feed that back, because the plan for going forward is it's not going to be another 8 years until this is reviewed again. The plan will be that there's an annual read through and check. Has stuff changed? Does the world look different? Whatever, do you know what's different, and make if an update needs to get done, it'll get done more regularly. So if there are things that you're looking at and you're reading it and thinking this doesn't work for me, then please let it be known. Yeah.
And practically speaking, that probably means email Pauline and then she'll put you in touch with Scottish Government. Or
yeah, why not? Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, certainly for me, I think it's that thing about there's a lot of detail which should really help with the accountability, and that the thing for me is that in the cost of living crisis that we're in at the moment, my worry is that the SDS is one of the casualties. You know, that people say, "Oh well, we would have done that, but we can't do that now," and a lot of what we've worked so hard to get in place gets eroded because of fear, and good stuff doesn't always cost more. In fact, a lot of the time it doesn't. So I just think that's one of my main hopes for the guidance, is because it's quite specific around about what people should and shouldn't do when they're thinking about things, that it'll give them the confidence to not backtrack on things and hopefully keep moving forward.
That'd be nice.
Good.
And if anybody wants to come next Tuesday to that discussion, they would just get in touch with us at info in -controlscotland.org.uk address.
Yes, please. On Microsoft Teams, so hopefully everybody can join. Hope to see as many folk there as we can.
Perfect. All right. See everybody next year.
Well, thank you very much, Hannah, for joining us. But is June hiding in the background to come and say Merry Christmas? Because it's tradition that we have the whole gang.
I am. I've been watching backstage. Great webinar, and I just definitely wanted to pop on because I know this is our last webinar before Christmas, so just wanted to wish everybody a fantastic Christmas. It's been a tough year this year with everything going on, so hopefully everybody will have the best possible Christmas and a great new year.
Brilliant.
Yes, what she said.
Yeah, we would all just echo that, June. I think we'd just say yes, that's exactly what we'd like to say.
Yeah.
And also thank you to all our viewers who have been watching us all year long, and hope you continue to join us every webinar Wednesday.
Brilliant.
And it was great seeing you as well, Hannah.
And our next one will be, are we doing it the first Wednesday of 2015, which would be?
I suspect not.
Yeah, so we might push it back to the second Wednesday.
Aye, let's do that. Yeah, so we'll put it up on our social media and let folk know when we're going to be up doing that. But I don't think we'll get as many viewers as we might hope if we did it the very first Wednesday back. We'll let folk digest their mince pies before coming on a webinar.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right, everyone. See you again next time.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Have a great Christmas.